Hi, good evening, everyone. Oh, I'm a bit louder than I thought it would be. Sorry. So, good evening, everyone. It's a real pleasure to welcome you to the inaugural lecture of Professor Steve King this evening. Steve joined the University of York, the Department of Computer Science, in 1995. I had to look it up. You received your Long Service Award a couple of years ago now, so that's clear on that. I first met Steve in 2007 in an interview panel when he was deputy head of department and interviewed me to become a lecturer in the department. And when I joined the department, he tasked me with working with Helen Petrie to set up the MSc in Human-Centered Interactive Technologies, which involved a process which seemed to be involving filling in lots of forms under his direction, taking the forms back to Steve and going, well, let's do it. He'll go, no, try and do like, okay, I'll go and do that. So I'll come back and I'll sort of show you this. He goes, that's fine, now put that into the planning committee, and then they get feedback, and then you kind of go, right, what you need to do with this, and oh, you probably need to go and talk to so-and-so, and then when they've told you what to do, you need to go and talk to so-and-so, and then put it in this other committee, and so it went on. And steadily he was sort of kind of keeping me right, and the program was still running, so we did something right, Helen, under Steve's guidance. Steve then went on from being deputy head of department to chair of the Standing Committee on Assessment, then associate dean in the Faculty of Sciences for Teaching and Learning, and he's now what's my favourite indirect title of associate pro-vice chancellor of the university for teaching and learning. So he's had all these senior roles, and as a result, you probably tell from when he was keeping me right, setting up programs, he knows how this university works very well. But is also interested in trying to make it work better. And but what's also impressed me about Steve is that throughout all of these very senior and quite pressured roles, he's been a teacher in the classroom. He's been in with the first years, second years, third years, teaching computer science, and not only teaching computer science, but teaching it brilliantly. Always receiving really good feedback, even when he's teaching maths, which everybody in computer science finds very difficult to teach. Steve nonetheless gets excellent feedback. And actually, as I was reflecting on this, and I realised, of course, what he's really doing when I first started, he was teaching me. He was teaching me how the university works, how to get things done, and what all the processes were. And actually, I think in all of his other roles, if you look around, as head of department, I still come to Steve going, how does this work? And he'll explain it very carefully, and then I go in and try and do it. And I think what is really there is at the heart of that, he likes to make things work better. He wants things to run well, and he wants people to do well and to flourish in the environment they're in. And in fact, he's just teaching us all how to do it. And so it's with great pleasure, I was really delighted to hear when Steve been made a professor for teaching and learning, the first in the Department of Computer Science. It's an absolutely brilliant accolade for him, but really recognises the strengths he's had for his entire time through here. So I hope you're really looking forward to his talk this evening. I know I am. Steve, I'll hand over to you.
Thank you, Paul, I think, for setting me up like that. Thank you for that introduction. Thank you to everybody that's here. Thank you to everybody who's watching online as well. It's really great that you've made the time to come out to listen to some random musings from somebody who's been newly professorised. That bit I know how it works as well. First, a couple of things before we get started. First of all, if you are expecting a talk for Black History Month, I'm sorry to disappoint you. It's a talk on law, racism and resistance. I'm afraid that talk is over in the Piazza building on the other side of the courtyard over there. The advert for that talk I saw earlier this week, it said there are 4 powerful speakers. You've only got one here tonight with me, and I'm not sure about powerful, so we'll have to see how that one goes. And unless the questions and answers go in a very strange direction, I'm not planning on talking about law, racism, or resistance, even though those are very important topics. Secondly, the thing I want to say is that preparing this talk has actually taken me quite a long way out of my comfort zone. I'm quite happy talking about formal languages, first year automata theory, even talking about NSS results and TEF outcomes to Senate, as I was doing yesterday. This is a lot more personal, and it's not the sort of lecture that I'm used to doing. And in fact, I was thinking about it, and this feels, the last time I felt like this was probably at my wedding reception 26 years ago. 26 years ago, something like that, yeah. So based on that, I thought I would set you a university trivia question to keep your minds going. Sometime in the next 45 minutes, your minds will wander, I assure you of that. So think about this. If my audience on that day included a couple of polar bears and a crowd of people on a railway station, where was that reception held? And I have to say that there are certain people in the room who were at that wedding reception, obviously. Certain people who know the story, and somebody else, David was there as well, wasn't he? Yeah. So you're disqualified. You're not allowed to do this. So let's get started then. So with those things, what I'm going to talk about, I've structured it really around my career, and I've broken my career down into three parts. With a little bit on the end for the bits, some thoughts about the future, and also some thoughts about those things that didn't fit in anywhere else very conveniently. So where did I start off? I came to York, as Paul said, in 1995. In the first 10 years or so, just under 10 years of my career, I spent most of my time teaching on masters and industrial courses. I was appointed to a lectureship here in York, actually by accident, really. I was working in Oxford, and I was doing my PhD part-time in Oxford while working, and there was a lectureship came up in Oxford, and I applied for it. I didn't get it, but I got my CV already. And in those days, any PhD students here will be very jealous to know you could sign on while you were doing a PhD, and you could get unemployment benefit. But they were phasing that out in those days, and I needed to convince the Dole office that I was genuinely looking for a job. So I had the application I'd made to Oxford unsuccessfully, so I'd had my CV already. So I thought the York job was advertised. I thought I would apply for that as well. Rather ruining my plans, colleagues here did actually give me the job, which really wasn't what I'd been intending to happen. Particularly as Claire was still in Oxford in the middle of her PhD, and I didn't. I spent a long time, or both of us spent a long time, the next couple of years, doing weekend commuting. We got to know Birmingham New Street Station very well, which was, in those days, well, it's not very nice now, but it was even worse then. So the job I came to was really teaching on masters in industrial courses. As it says on the slide, they're basically one-week courses. This was very much what I was doing in Oxford. We used to teach an MSc, and Jim was my colleague in Oxford there, my boss at one point, teaching on these one-week courses in Oxford. There was a software engineering master's program. Here it was a safety critical systems engineering program. And I taught on those modules for a good period of time. We had mostly part-time students who were working in industry, who came in came into the classroom here in Oxford, and we had a week-long course, intensive course, and then they went back into the industry the following Monday. We taught Monday to Friday lunchtime, I think, and then they went back on the following Monday. So it was lovely. It was similar to what I'd done previously in Oxford. I knew the stuff. I was teaching stuff that I knew very well, and I ended up really enjoying what we were doing there. We had small class sizes. I put it on the slide, between 10 and 30. It was small numbers. It was really nice. These were lovely, good students. So what did I learn from those days? Well, those students were the best thing. They were motivated students. They had come on these courses because they wanted to do it, and because their bosses were willing to pay for them as well. But the nice thing was they were motivated because they were going back and being able to apply the techniques that we were teaching them. They were able to apply those when they went back into work on Monday morning, and that was really rather good. And it was nice to see the effect that you could have through that sort of thing. The other thing that was great about those students is that some of them had an extraordinary amount of experience. They were really had been in their industries a long time. And if you were clever, you could get them to do quite a lot of the teaching for you. So Oleg is nodding, he knows this, and he's done it here. So it's really actually wonderful that if you can use the experience that you've got among the students in the classroom to improve the teaching experience for everybody else. And because they were small cohorts, it was lovely. You could get discussions going. You could get to know everybody on a course. Maybe not so easy to do that sort of thing in a large classroom. But the other things that I've worked out, things I've learned, that intensive format is great, but it's really hard work. It is intensive, and it's intensive both on the students who have to learn, for 35 hours Monday to Friday, but also on the staff. It's really hard work for the staff. So it's a nice way of teaching. It gets stuff out into industry, but it's actually hard work. The other thing that I learned from it is the realization, really, that part-time students have issues in their they have a real life outside being a student. Okay, so they're there, they have families, they have jobs, and things happen in their lives. So you had to be really careful to be looking after the students in a different sort of way from how you would look after an 18 to 21-year-old student. So, and one of the issues that did come up several times was that we found that although their employers had paid for them to come on these courses and sponsored them to come on the courses, certainly in the later part of the course, the MSc course, we would do 18 months of talk, 1-week modules, and then an 18-month project. Their bosses quite often forgot that they were supposed to be being students still. So we had to do quite a lot of work to help those students. And I remember we introduced, I'm not sure whether they're still happening, project weeks? Do they still happen? Yes and no, says Oleg. But what we introduced at that point, we introduced 3 periods during that 18-month long time when they were doing their projects, where they had to come back to York. So their bosses were reminded that they were no longer, that they were still part of doing an MSc program, and that they were out of the office, and there was a good reason for them being out of the office. So it was really good to get that and help them as they were doing those things. And the last thing I learned was a more personal one. Doing a part-time doctorate is, there's a few nods I can see in the audience, doing a part-time doctorate is really hard work. I hadn't quite finished my doctorate before I left Oxford, but I did finish it, and eventually, with some nudging, I think it's fair to say, from various heads of department that were around in those days, and with the threat that my job wouldn't be made permanent if I didn't finish the doctorate. That was quite an eye-opener, and got me down to it. So I did finish, and I moved on with the best part of my career. But I think I'm actually very grateful. Keith Bamber was the head of department at the time, and I'm very grateful to him for the very kindly way in which he kicked me to finish my doctorate. So I thought I would show you what it looked like in one of those MSc classes. And this is a photo that was taken during a module that I was teaching. I think probably it was a software engineering module. I have to say that it's not while I was actually teaching. It was an eye-opener, really, that it was a software engineering module, and by that time we had some full-time students, and we had a significant cohort of Chinese students, and many of these students in the front row here. I don't know whether this was the end of a week, or they'd had a hard night the night before, or it was just the theory that I'd been teaching them, I don't know. But as soon as we announced that there was going to be a break, they went for 40 winks. So what I really like in this picture is the sort of bemused expression that this gentleman has over here, and he's just reading the newspaper. But yeah, so that was one of the classes that I taught. And other things to notice on there: there's lots of paper on the desks. In those days, we used to provide every student who came on these courses with an A4 folder. Do we still do that? No, don't do that anymore, no. We used to do it in those days, and it was horrible. You had to produce these folders at the beginning of the week, before the beginning of the week, which contained copies of all the lecture slides, copies of all the practical sheets they were going to do. We added to them during the week, and the answers to all the exercises went in. So they were the bane of my life, really, those horrible folders. David probably remembers filling lots of those folders. We didn't have a VLE in those days. That was what they took away. That was the course notes they took away, and that was, I mean, it was actually a really good piece of advertising, because they took it away, and it was what they took back into their workplace, so that they could apply the material that we've been teaching them. So the other thing that you might notice in that classroom, what's not there? laptops. There are no laptops, yeah. There are no phones either, but there are no laptops. That picture comes from a sort of era where I can still remember where educators were being worried about what the impact of laptops and things like that would be on the classroom. And I can remember serious discussions about whether students would spend the whole time, if you allowed laptops in, would they play Space Invaders on them the whole time? Would they, you're nodding because you do, or... yeah, indeed. But I can actually remember discussions, and I remember seeing in a journal article somewhere the suggestion that we should divide up our lecture theatre and have the pure side over here with no laptops at all, and the corrupted youth over here with laptops, so that they wouldn't be distracted by what was going on in the other part of the classroom. I'm not going to suggest that for our first years nowadays. So that was my early part of my career in computer science. A lot of work on teaching these one-week modules, teaching older students who were working in industry and at master's level. The second part of my career here has really been about, I suppose it's probably most like a typical university teaching and research role that I've done. I moved over into teaching, away from the teaching the one-week modules to teaching on standard terms, as it was then, not semesters, terms. Mostly to the standard students, the 18 to 21-year-olds. When I started off, probably most of them were UK students rather than overseas students. We have more overseas students now, which is wonderful. But they were mostly home students. And I guess it was about 100 in the cohort. It seemed quite a reasonable size, certainly compared to the 10 to 30 that we had in the master's courses. This was quite a large cohort in the lecturing theatre. At that point, I started teaching the first year module on formal languages and automata. So this is early stuff that we teach our undergraduate computer scientists, mathematically based stuff, as Paul said earlier. But really it's about the theory of computer science and how you can describe machines and languages that are important in computer science. And it's the basis of lots of other stuff that's going to come later on. I still teach that now. They've let me keep going that module. It's been through several iterations and is a slightly different module now from what it was then. But it's still good stuff, and it's still stuff that they really ought to learn. I started then taking on various administrative roles, and at this point it was more roles within the department. So I was, as Paul mentioned, chair of Board of Studies for a couple of years, and then I became the first deputy head for teaching. Up to then we'd only had a head of department, and he had sole responsibility for running everything, and this was the point at which I guess it must have been about 2007, something like that, where we introduced deputy heads of departments. So we had a deputy head for research, deputy head for teaching, and Susan was deputy head for moving to this campus. Associate was it? Yeah, okay. That was a really interesting time helping to do that. It meant I did slightly less in the way of teaching, but I enjoyed my time as deputy head and got to know various people across the university. During that period, I did continue doing some research. My research was on formal methods, ways of specifying and designing computer systems, writing down designs for computer systems so that you can know that they do actually do what they're supposed to do, to the extent that you can prove that they can do it mathematically, if that's really what you have to do, and certain bits of software where it's actually worth doing that sort of thing. So that was really wonderful, doing that work, a combination really, therefore, of administrative work, research work, teaching work. And that was probably the part of my career where it was really in balance over those sorts of things. Later on, my career has got somewhat out of balance, I think it's fair to say. So what did I learn during that period? Well, various other things. I learned something about teaching to large classes, what I then thought were large classes. They were classes that were in break lecture theatres like this, with these sorts of numbers, probably slightly more than this, at least at the beginning of the term. We had, as well as lectures, we had problem classes and practical sessions as well, and those tended to be smaller, less formal, but but important parts of teaching. Those larger lecture theatres, larger lecture groups, made it more difficult. I mean, you've already seen how I've lectured. I've asked you questions. That's my standard style of lecturing, is to ask my audience questions. That works very well if you've got a small class of 10 to 30 or so. It's much harder with a larger class, and particularly when you can't actually see who's right at the back of the lecture theatre. That's hard work. So we have to think about ways we can change our techniques of teaching in order to deal with what I then thought were large classes. The second thing I learned was something that's self-evident, really. Not all CS students, computer science students, are keen on mathematics. And that's despite the fact that we have an entry requirement for A-level mathematics. We do expect our students to be mathematically literate. And therefore, I would suspect that when you have a first-year module that is about teaching this very mathematical theory, they ought to be keen on that sort of thing. I found that they were perhaps not so keen. It is a core module. They do have to do it, so they don't have any choice about it. And that was really rather different from these motivated students I'd had in the MSc classes. So you have to work out how you can maintain interest and keep students going, convince them that they really do need to get at least that 40% that they need to get through the module. I've worked with students, working with students, not just dealing with individual students. Quite often, this is the period of my career where I started working with student representatives, student reps. At this point, there were mostly reps within the department, and as Chair of Board of Studies, as Deputy Head, I needed to get to know the students who were representing their cohorts. That's really important work, I think, and I think the work that student reps do is really valuable. And that we as academics and people who run departments and faculties and universities and things need to do as much as we can to help those student reps to do the job that they're doing, because it's a really valuable job. I've seen in my time here some really, really impressive student reps, particularly the sabbatical officers we've had. Some of them have gone on to be really quite impressive people in their careers. I wonder whether we ought to be doing more to value what they do, giving up the time that they do to represent their cohorts. So, the last sort of lesson that I learned was, I mentioned already that this perhaps slight lack of keenness on mathematical stuff. And I worked out that really what students like doing was playing on computers. That's what our students like doing. So what I needed to do is find a way of finding a sort of hands-on way of teaching this really, what can be quite dry theoretical stuff that is involved in the module. So, I just want to have a little diversion into thinking about how you can make teaching more interesting, interactive. I don't know which of those words is better. Certainly interactive, and so how we can show that get the students involved in what they're doing. And this is the sort of stuff that I was teaching students. That's a diagrammatic representation of a Turing machine. There is a prize for anybody who can work out the language that it accepts. No, nobody's going to get it. So one or two might. But it's that sort of notation that we're interested in looking at. And the sort of stuff that I'm teaching these first-year students is these sorts of diagrams, other sorts of diagrams that are related to this. And it's really about, as I said earlier, it's about the languages, sets of strings that make up a language, and different ways of expressing those strings. So you might talk about them with a machine like this and explain the strings that are accepted by that machine. Or you might talk about a grammar as another different way of representing the same language. And one of the things that students need to learn is how you convert between them, how you can start off with a machine like this and convert it into a grammar expressed in a different sort of way. So I found, very fortunately, a piece of software that an educator in the United States had produced specifically for teaching this bit of computer science. It's a piece of software called JFLAP, which stands for Java Formal Languages and Automata Program, I think is the boring last bit, but JFLAP. That's the piece of software that I used, and it's wonderful because it allows students not only to draw diagrams like this very simply. You can see you need to be able to draw the blobs that are the states that we've got here. There are arrows that are going between them, there are transitions between the states, and there are annotations on those arrows. All of those things are not terribly easy to draw, but the first stage of the program just allows you to draw them very easily. The second stage of the program allows you to use those algorithms that I was talking about for converting between different forms of automata, different forms of representations of languages, and allows you to step through the algorithms to really understand what's going on. This went down really, I think, quite well with students. They appreciated the fact that they got this software that they could play with. They were much happier playing around with a piece of software than they were doing pencil and paper exercises in a problem class. I don't know why. Pencil and paper exercises seem to be good enough for me. The one bit of the software that I didn't encourage them to use, very often in these algorithms, there is a button that says, do it all. Do it all in one go. And I discourage them. That's a very useful button. As an educator, that's a very useful button, particularly when you're marking exam scripts. If students come up with a different answer from the one you're expecting, and you need to test equivalence, some of these things you can test equivalence on, and you just press the button and it says yes or no. Unfortunately, it doesn't tell you why. So you need to work out what's gone wrong if the student's got it wrong. But if they've got it right, and the two things are equivalent, you can give them full marks and just go on to the next question, which is wonderful. So that was what I was doing in my own class to try and make the teaching of theory more interesting. Another thing that, I guess actually more recently, we've seen the advent of things like, well, as our classes have got larger and larger, it's been more and more difficult to have that sort of dialogue with students, to ask them questions and to get things back and really try to understand whether students are understanding the concepts that you're trying to get across. So as I say, I like to ask students, and I like them to answer the questions that I've asked. Okay, so I wanted to find out a way of doing that a bit better. You know, we give 50-minute lectures, and I don't particularly like listening to the sound of my own voice for 50 minutes. And I don't see why everybody else should listen to my voice for 50 minutes either, without anything else going on. So we've recently had this sort of instant polling software, and I think this is really interesting for being able to get interaction with a large audience very quickly. So it's not very complicated, so I think we're going to try it now. So my daughter's just got her phone out already. She knows exactly what we're doing. So down at the bottom here, we've got, all you need is a browser of some sort, and the address you're looking for is menti.com. That's the address, and then the code to put in, which in this case is, I don't know why, 5895703. This will allow us to ask a question. And here is the question, and this is where my family are distressed with me. There is a question. There are two photographs there, and this is not the question that I ask my students, okay? But I wanted to ask a question just to show really how easy it is to do this sort of instant polling. Now, if I can make the technology work here, I'm going to show, if I can get my mouse to appear. Here. Right, so the question we're asking, which of these children, it's a very boring question, right? And there isn't really a right answer to it. I was going to ask which is the cuter of the two children, but I thought that would cause so many family ructions that I wasn't going to go that way. So this is the question that you have to answer, having put that code in. Is Jennifer a king, or is Charlie a king, or are they both kings? That's the question you have to answer. So I'm hoping that you can do that, and I know which one Jennifer's voting for. And what it says down here is that at the moment the results are hidden. I don't see why I did that really, but and I need to press H to do that. And, oh, jolly good. Okay, so you can see how easy it is to get some information. So we've had 30 seconds, and I've got some information out of you very quickly. Thank you, Charlie. And I think you're only allowed to vote once. That's the other thing. Is Jennifer telling Claire how to do it? Yeah. Okay. Right, okay. I would not ask a question like that in a lecture, but there are other questions that you can ask, and things that will give you some really interesting information very quickly. So the sort of thing that I asked, this was towards the end of teaching with module once. I had some choices about how we marked the final formative test. There were some time constraints or something like that. I was to a certain extent, I was trying to get out of doing the marking. I gave them the choice. Did they want me to mark it, or did they want to mark it themselves if I gave them the model answers, or did they have some other method of doing it? Unfortunately, as you can see, the result was overwhelming, and I did have to do the marking. Students didn't mind that. So that was one question that I asked. And the other question that I asked in that one, what's the most helpful way to run a 2-hour revision class? Okay, we're really asking the students, what do they feel about the right ways to do these sorts of things? And again, it didn't take very long. So this was entirely open text form answers, so they can just say exactly what they want to do. It's quite fun because if you get these things going, and the students can watch them going at the same time, and it starts scrolling through, and you can see the sorts of things that happen. You have to be somewhat brave to do this, because there is nothing controlling what the students say. I don't think there was anything too silly in this one. You get some, okay. After a while, you get the idea. So we'll move swiftly on from that. I did in one class, 1 year, halfway through the year, I decided, I was playing around with Mentimeter at the time, I decided we'd see what worked. So I asked students the question, what one thing would you like me to change in the second half of the course? And this is genuine answers, and some of them are horrible because they say, we'd like you to teach all the modules, which is not going to happen. But there are some nice things in there. And I mean, although I'm not doing it, I don't know who the Tuesday evening gang are. But there were, and this was several years back, so I don't know what other things they were referring to. But it was wonderful getting that sort of feedback and knowing that I had got something right, that I was doing something right. They didn't particularly want me to change anything. There are one or two other things that they would like changing. It's not on that slide, but there were times when they said you should release the slides a little bit earlier. Steve for Pope, I'm not quite sure what that one is. Use less weird symbols. I mean, I'm not sure whether that's fewer weird symbols, but or the symbols themselves should be less weird. I don't know. It's interesting, but it's fun. And actually, if you put it up in a classroom, students get engaged in it, get really engaged, because they see it appearing on the board, and that sort of cascading effect. You can see what's going on, and it's really quite fun looking through that. Right, that was just a little diversion into that stuff. And I need to come back here. Okay, we've done that. Right. Moving. Oh, sorry. No, I did have one more thing I was going to say about those pictures. Just when you thought. No, it's not too bad. I use those pictures. They're not there accidentally. I use those pictures as one of the two pictures for quite a few years. At the very first lecture of my first year module, I would put one of these pictures up. I can't remember whether it was Jennifer or Charlie or I'd alternated them or something. Notice the interesting things about them, that they are both about, they've got food, okay? Charlie's got something here, and I think it's a piece of birthday cake or something there. And I used to tell my students, there are 3 reasons why you have to study, 3 reasons why I tell Charlie or Jennifer why they have to eat up their food. It makes them grow up big and strong, it's quite nice. And there was a 3rd reason, I can't remember what it is. Because you have to go to bed without, otherwise you're going to bed without tea. You know, it's a sort of punishment thing that you need to eat it up. And then I would tell them, there are 3 also reasons why you have to study mathematics, which correspond to those 3 things. And I'll tell you what they are at the end of the lecture. So, and that's, I'm not going to tell you what they are because I'm not sure I can remember them. But you'll notice I've done the same thing in this lecture. I've set you a quiz question at the beginning to keep your attention right the way through to the end, I hope. So, and the other thing about this lecture, these photos, so this sort of came back to haunt me a couple of during last academic year. I was sitting on some staging in Central Hall before a university choir concert. I sing tenor for my sins, and it was a break in the rehearsal, and I was sitting next to somebody in the bass section, whom I never normally talk to. We don't talk to basses. But I was talking to him, and I, as far as I knew, I'd never met him before. We don't sit together in rehearsals or anything like that. But this was just before the final concert, and they moved everybody around. And it turned out that he was a student, had been through computer science department. I had taught him, and he remembered, I think it was Charlie, from the very first lecture that I had given. He didn't remember anything else from the lecture course, but he did remember young Charlie. So that was rather nice, and you know, that's what happens when you keep going on these things. So more recently then, we move on to the sort of last 10 years or so. I've had, as Paul says, various university and faculty and university roles sort of alternating. I was chair of the university's assessment committee, SCA, the Standing Committee on Assessment, so in charge of all of the assessment across the whole university, which was really interesting, very narrow focus, but really interesting part of my career. And then I moved on to be Associate Dean for Teaching, Learning and Students. I think that's the right order. Teaching, Learning and Students in the Science faculty. Once again, the first one to do that. I think we haven't had any Associate Deans prior to the appointment of myself and some colleagues at that point. And then last year I became the Associate PBC for Teaching, Learning and Students. And as Paul says, it's wonderful. There's more prefixes to that title than is sane, really. All of those points, those posts, it's interesting to note, they're all percentage buyouts. Okay, so all of them, I can't remember, some of them are 50%, some are 70%. But they all allowed me to keep going in my teaching, my work in computer science. And I think that, for me, that's really important. It gives me that idea that I'm staying grounded, really, keeping in with the, making sure I understand what's still going on at the, in the real teaching in the departments. The CS cohort now, I think it's about 250, something like that, yeah, 240, 250, yeah. So the numbers are going up, and thinking back to those days of teaching 10 to 30 students, it's really rather different. This is probably not big enough. I don't think it's big enough for us.
Not yet, no, that 250 would
Yeah.
be big enough.
Yeah. So
single subject.
yeah, just yeah. So we go into other lecture theatre now. So it's hard work. And then over the last few years, we've had some serious things to deal with as well. Down the bottom bullet here. So the things that I've been lucky enough to be Associate Dean and Associate PBC while we've been trying to deal with these things. So COVID obviously had an enormous impact. We've had industrial action off and on for several years now. Over the last year or two, we've been working our way towards the thing that we've just started, which is the modularisation and semesterisation project, where we are working with moving the university onto a semester system, much more like what goes on in many other universities, and keeping a standard size for modules as well. Again, some lessons that I've learned. Well, again, that large lecture thing comes back again, but now they really are large. Okay, so it is a different sort of problem, talking to 250 students. The effect of this is, of course, the problem classes that we run as well, that support the teaching, the lecture teaching, they have to be repeated. We don't have classrooms that are big enough to do 250. I'm not sure I would want to teach 250 people in a problem class at the same time. But we have to repeat those things now much more frequently through the week. So the work of graduate teaching assistants and so on becomes very much more important. Another change that we can notice, the change in A-levels. The students who come in, so these first-year students that I'm teaching are just come through A-levels. Some of them have now studied some of this sort of material before. Not all of them, which is an interesting challenge to have, but some of them have done computing A-level and perhaps have done this sort of thing before. So, and I mentioned problem classes there. Notice I didn't say anything about practical classes, the software sheet that we use. When we came back from COVID, I think I made a mistake. I decided that the practical classes, the software classes I'd run, I'd developed over the years some very good, some effective problem sheets, worksheets for people to work through on their own to understand these algorithms and all this sort of stuff using JFlap. And we never used to get any questions at the front of the class, and GTAs didn't get any questions. So I thought, oh, well, I'll just leave it to the students then. I'll give them the sheets, tell them to do it, and of course they'll do it. Yes, so perhaps they don't. Their ideas about the value of their time is perhaps not the same as mine. So we're going to change. I think that was wrong. Right? When they got to exam time, some of them did realise that actually it would have been useful to understand J-flat. It would have given them some assistance and these things, but perhaps not while they were doing it. So I'm going to change next year, and I'm going to actually adjust the problem classes so that there are J-flat related exercises in the problem class, rather than expecting them to go off and do something entirely separate. The other thing that I've noticed over the years is this idea of co-creation, and I've talked a little bit about it really in that what I was talking about with getting feedback from students, but this idea of working with both reps and other groups of students to make sure that we understand what they want, how they're going to do things, and to work with them to solve the problems that we have. I think that was quite an effective technique that we had during COVID, during industrial action, really quite effective in making sure that we came out of that, well, I think better than some other institutions did. And I think a lot of the credit for that really probably goes to our students. They are bright students and they have some good ideas, and so we should be making use of that. Finally, I think the other thing that we've learned over the last few years is about resilience, and I think both students and staff have had a lot thrown at them, a lot that's outside their control, which is always difficult, and so we've been through some of those recent challenges, and we've survived it. Perhaps in some ways we've thrived, in other ways perhaps we've just survived, but it's been good, and we've got through it all, so that's a lesson that we've learned. Moving on then, I've almost come to the end of my career. I started that sentence and I thought that's not what I was meant to say really. Where's my inbox? Well, my inbox is overflowing, but here are a number of things that are in my inbox at the moment. Generative AI is something that's been a lot in the press. There are some really interesting challenges about what we do with the likes of ChatGPT. How it changes what we do in terms of teaching, how it changes in terms of what students can do, want to do. There's some interesting stuff that we've got there. The other issue I've got is about reviewing processes and how the review process rather. We do an annual review of teaching of the programs that go on in different departments. We need to make sure we do that better. We paused it during COVID. We need to bring it back. We are bringing it back this year. And understanding how we use the data that's available to us about how students are doing, what's going on in the university. We need to make sure we use that in our annual review processes. As the university has expanded, we've taken on some new sorts of teaching, and what I've called here, I don't really like the phrase, but non-standard provision. So things that aren't just the ordinary undergraduate and postgraduate teaching. Degree apprenticeships are things that we have in the university now, and there are people in the audience who know an awful lot about our degree apprenticeships. And there are people in the audience also who know about our online programs. So these are different sorts of teaching that we're doing, and we need to make sure that we're doing that in the best way we possibly can, and keeping the quality assurance of that up to date. And then finally, there's what you might almost call business as usual. It's not really business as usual. I put new department at the bottom there. I was in a meeting earlier today of the project board for the Department of Architecture and the Built Environment, new department that's coming to the university. Really interesting stuff that they are going to be producing. It's a relatively long-term thing. We're looking at students coming in 2025, I think. But we have to define courses. There are interesting issues about accreditation for architects. That's quite a fun one to try and deal with. So again, it's about we've appointed a head of department, a founding head of department for that new department. But we need to make sure that we're supporting that growing academic team that are working there. That head of department, there are going to be other appointments, and they're working with some of the other departments on the campus. So what we're aiming for there is making sure that we're supporting them to produce an exciting new program, the sort of new program that will excite students, will get good students coming here. And I was saying to somebody earlier on that actually that's perhaps a measure of my move over to management, that it's not just an exciting program, but it has to be an exciting program that produces the right number of students. So 10 yeyears ago, I might have just said it's got to be an exciting program. Now it's got to be one that has the right resources coming in. And then the numbers all add up. So what else can I see coming over the horizon? There are a number of issues, problems that I can see coming. I mentioned the idea of scale, teaching at scale. there's an awful lot of stuff that the university has got much bigger over the 28 years that I've been here. And teaching at scale is something that I think we need to do more work on, make sure that we are producing the same quality of teaching for a greater number of students, and it's not just a simple business of fitting more people into a lecture theatre. I put there flipped classroom. It's an interesting one here. Some departments, and computer science is one of them, are emphasising this idea of a flipped classroom, which originated before COVID, but perhaps has more emphasis since then. The idea that you can record lectures, get students to go away and read the lectures, and then use the face-to-face sessions to do more individual question and answers, more backup work with students on the material that they have, of course, diligently looked at the lectures for. I'm not convinced about that bit. I think we need some way of forcing the students to to actually look at the lectures. The better students do, but I'm sure there are some students who again, have other ways of spending their time and perhaps are not doing that. And I've sort of been a bit of a laggard and Luddite, one or the other, and stuck with real lectures, standing in front of the classroom and actually talking to people and telling them this is the primary way you're going to get your material, rather than sitting on at home in your pyjamas watching a recording of it. Thank you, Dana. That's one thing. I think we've got the teaching at scale. There's clearly more and more digital impact. We're working on technology is giving us all sorts of different possibilities of doing things. But the thing that I think is really interesting is that we need to maintain what I've called the social part of learning. Learning is a social activity, and you do it with other people, and it's an interactive thing. So I think we need to work out, if we are going to have more of the digital side built in, then how do we keep the social side? And that's a really interesting challenge that we've got. We've got more and more non-traditional offerings and non-standard programs, all those sorts of things. I think there'll be more of that coming as the government's, whichever government we have, the lifelong learning entitlement comes in, the idea that you can do credit accumulation and all sorts of things like that. I think that's going to be an interesting challenge for people in my sort of role. And I think we've got to continue this idea of co-creation. I think co-creation with students is one of the ways that we are going to make progress, and we need to work out ways that we can keep on doing that. To finish up, my odds and sods slide, my slide that's got everything left that I couldn't really didn't fit naturally anywhere else. I wanted to mention a few things that I think where we've learned things, where we are doing things much better now than we were 28 years ago. And I want to start with those couple of things there on inclusive teaching. I think making our teaching suitable for all students, whatever their characteristics, whether they have disabilities of any sort or anything like that, making our teaching suitable for all of them is something that we do much better now than we did 28 years ago. I don't think we were really too worried about that sort of thing then, and we are much more worried about it now, and rightly so. And widening participation, and I think the university's emphasis on making sure that we are making access to higher education available to all students, whatever their backgrounds, is really important, and I think we do that much better than we did a long time ago. Student voice, I've mentioned that a few times. I think we did have student reps when I first came here in 1995, but I don't think they did very much. And they weren't supported, and there certainly wasn't this idea of co-creation. So I think possibly in those early days, it was more about making sure that we were ticking a box. Now I think we do actually really take quite very seriously what they say to us. Some other things that haven't really fitted in anywhere else. Word about experiences outside York. I've spent the majority of my academic career here. So you might think that I've got a very sort of insular, inward-looking view of things, but I have been a reviewer for the QAA, the Quality Assurance Agency, since 2011. So the QAA was the, if you like, the Ofsted for universities. I mean, not quite as bad as Ofsted. But we used to go into other higher education establishments and look at the sort of, in a team, look at the quality of the student experience, the quality mechanisms that they have there, and that sort of thing. And I've also been an external examiner, and that's another part of the role that I've really enjoyed doing. And I've been external at Sheffield, UCL, Oxford and Cardiff, some of them at undergrad, some postgrad level. I'm currently institutional external examiner at Warwick. And this is a really interesting part of the job, going in and seeing what other places do and seeing things that they do well, and sometimes the things that they do not so well. And what I've learned from going into those Russell Group universities as an external examiner and for the QAA going into a number of other different sorts of institutions, post-92s, FE colleges that do some HE and all those sorts of things. The things that I've come away from that really feeling is that the UK higher education sector is tremendously varied. It really is. It's a vast array of what is going on out there. And there's actually really good work going on all over the place. And I think that's really important to see. And it's not just in the so-called elite, the Russell Group. I think there are some really good things going on in places that are not in the Russell Group. In fact, in many ways, I think we can learn a lot from what the post-92s and the FE colleges that offer HE, that they can tell us the way that they do things. Some of the things that they do things are actually much better than the way we do it, so we should learn from that. I think it's important to maintain a sort of open outlook on those things and learning and remembering actually that the York way, which is something that's quite often quoted at you, is not the only way and it's not necessarily the best way either. That was a bit of a sermon, wasn't it? Sorry. I just want to say a little bit then about the academic supervisor role. We have academic supervisors at York. Over the years, I've been academic supervisor to a small group of students each year, almost every year. There must be well over 100 of those by now that I've seen through, and it's actually been a real privilege to go through and work with those students, to get to know them as individuals, seeing them progress. Sometimes they start off as rather timid freshers, and they work their way up to being, sometimes, confident graduates. And they set out on their journeys to conquer the world, whatever they're going to do, and it's really good to see that. And I think it's important that every student knows that there is at least one member of staff that actually really cares about what happens to them. Will stand by them, whatever dodgy circumstances they get into, will guide them to support services if they need support services, and will take pride in their progress and in their achievements. So I talked a little bit about the problems of scale, but I think this is one of the areas where we do need to make sure that one-to-one nature of the student and the supervisor is retained in some form or other. I think it's important that we have that, however large the university grows. And then a final lesson I've learned is about vocabulary, student vocabulary. It seems to me that students of every generation just come up with new vocabulary. You may have spotted, and I know that certain members of my family spotted, one of the bits of the midterm feedback that I had earlier on that was there under Menti was, "We stand Steve." I haven't the faintest idea what "we stand Steve" means. Well, I didn't. I went to my family, the younger members of my family, and they did reassure me that it was vaguely complimentary, but it could have meant anything. So student vocabulary is something that I have learned a little bit about as I've gone on along the way. And then finally, some non-lessons, the things we haven't learnt, the things that over 28 years I think we or I could have done better. And first of all, I want to talk about gender equality. And in the computer science department, I think our numbers are 20%, 15%. It's that sort of figure. It's better than it was 28 years ago, but it's nothing like what it should be. And I think I don't think the problem is necessarily here, but I think the problem is out there in schools. Jennifer, my daughter, told me, I think about the age of 14, that there's no way she was going to be a computer scientist. She is a scientist. But there's no way she was going to be a computer scientist, and that may have been to do with me, I don't know, probably was. But, you know, if we are missing out on 50% of our population in a growing area like computer science, then we're doing something wrong, frankly. So we really need to make sure that we are getting more girls coming into the computer science area. The second thing that I failed on miserably, and this will make some of you laugh. I will admit, the paperless revolution did pass me by, and I've never quite managed. Oh, you've got a piece of paper here, you know. Technology is wonderful, but, and it's good because I've actually got rid of the notes from off my laptop, so I can't read them on the laptop anymore, so that's why I have the piece of paper. So paperless office passport. Anybody who's been near my office or my desk at home, or seen my desk at home, will not be surprised to hear that. I'm sure actually that the fire safety officers will be eventually happy when I retire. The skip that has been offered to be positioned outside the department will be filled, but probably not. No, I should say not till I retire. But anyway, that ceremonial clearing of my office, I'm sure will happen at some point. And finally, the last thing I failed to do over the last 28 years is to preserve my hair. So that's where I was in 1995, roughly speaking. I did have some hair there, but it's all gone, so apologies for that. That's just about me done, I think. So let me, I need to say some thank yous. I want to say thank you, first of all, to, I want to sort of acknowledge the great support I've had throughout my career at York. One of the great things about working here is the fantastic colleagues that I have in the computer science department and in many other departments that I've worked with. And not just the academics, and it's really great to see that the professional support colleagues here, and those, I think, are the unsung colleagues, without whom we would not do the fantastic teaching and research that we do, because the place would fall apart, basically. So, thank you to all of them, both academics and professional support colleagues. I'm not going to name anybody because I would miss too many people out. The second thank you is to students, to all of the students that I've encountered over 28 years of teaching, both in the classroom and also in various committees and meetings. I have to say that as I've slowly gone up the management route, I've been kept grounded and honest, really, by the students that I've taught. I find there's nothing quite like the feeling when you know you've explained something well to the whole cohort, or perhaps even better, when you've explained something for the nth time to a single student, and you can see that something has got through. And that's wonderful. You can see that there's a spark of understanding that's been lit, and that's really great. And finally, most importantly, I want to say thank you to my family. First of all, to my parents, who aren't with us anymore, but they did instill in me both a love for education and the importance of treating colleagues and students with respect. And also to my daughter and son, who've been mentioned once or twice. Both of them have now finished their, well, I think they have, finished their journeys as students, not at York, elsewhere. But both of them did actually end up as course reps, I think I'm right in saying. So, I don't know, maybe there's something in the genes. And I ought to remind them publicly that you do not need, despite the example of your parents, you do not need a PhD to make a successful career. So don't feel you need to go back and do anything like that. So they're off now, beginning their independent careers, but they've also done a great job over the years in reminding me that actually there's more to life than work. So I am actually looking forward to the retirement of the parental taxi service. So. Right, and finally, to my wife Claire, who's been a huge support to me throughout my career. She's allowed me to devote more time to my academic work than I probably should have done, particularly in the early years, and probably that's to the detriment of her own academic career. And it's worth noting that over the years, I've been reminded once or twice that she started her PhD after me, but finished it before me. But I have to say that without her help and support, it wouldn't be possible for me to note now, with a little bit of pride, that I've reached the title of professor before her. So that's the end of my thank yous, that's the end of what I want to say. Before we open up for questions, I did have one thing to finish off with, the thing that I left you with to start with. So can anybody remember or think about where that wedding reception might have been with polar bears and crowd on, I think, Paddington railway station? Any ideas? No? Actually, it's Royal Holloway. It's the picture gallery in Royal Holloway. So Claire was at Royal Holloway and Jennifer was at Royal Holloway later. But we had our wedding reception in the picture gallery at Royal Holloway. And this is a rather gruesome picture of, here are the two polar bears, destroying the remains of, I think, what was a failed expedition to find the Northwest Passage. It's the remains of a ship, and if you look in the bottom right-hand corner, it's probably the remains of the crew of the ship. It's rather gruesome. More pleasantly, this is a picture by Frith entitled The Railway Station. It's a large crowd on the railway station platform. So, there's a bit of education for you. There we go. That's all I was going to say. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Steve. we do have time just for one or two questions, I think, before the Game Society is coming in. So, if you use the mic, please, John,
For the people online.
Steve,
John.
you said learning is social. In what way is learning necessarily social? Does it apply to all students? And how can we best use student sociability to enhance learning?
It was probably an exaggeration. I think there is a social probably should have said there is a social aspect to learning. And I think that students, when they talk to each other, learn better. So when I run problem classes, rather than having them in rows just sitting there doing their exercises, I would rather have tables and they sit around the tables and discuss what they're doing. So I think the education process, I think, can be more productive if students talk to each other. In a subject like computer science, where we have a higher proportion of autistic students than probably in almost any other department, that's sometimes a challenge. And it's interesting to see a class where there are tables working beautifully in a social way, and other tables where there are half a dozen individuals working as individuals. And that's the way they will stay, and you're not going to be able to do anything about that. So I just think that my experience is that I think that many students work better if they work with other students. Thank you, John. Good question.
Charlie. That Charlie.
Just going back to your issue of paperless, I work a lot with text, considerable amount of text, and there's growing research that the brain works differently off paper than it does off a screen. And in fact, basically, when you're on the screen, a lot of the critical faculties turn off. And we have experienced this ourselves. We have accepted material on a screen, and then when we printed it off, we said, oh, what rubbish is this? How the hell did we accept it? And it is a fact, and the research does exist. And I get concerned now that lecturers are marking on the screen and not on paper. I know a lot of colleagues that I know will actually insist on paper and screen when they mark on the paper and just annotate the screen. I think it is something we should be looking at, that students are getting the best out of the lecturers if the lecturers are getting the best out of the material that they're working with.
I have a lot of sympathy with that. If I have a paper to read, papers for committee meetings and things like that, I will sometimes print them out. The department doesn't like me doing it, but I will sometimes print them out because I actually find it easier to absorb them that way. Sitting on the screen doing it is sort of soul destroying, but I don't think I read the stuff in the same way. So yeah, I have some sympathy with that. But we also have to think about how we manage to do things at scale, so that the marking process, how much will it cost to print out all of those things, and can we do it as quickly? We had some discussion about this at Senate yesterday, about how we make sure we're giving our students good feedback and in the right way and the right quality of feedback, quantity of feedback, and just making sure that the students get what they deserve. But it's an interesting point, yeah, thank you.
Any more questions? We're out of time, so actually, oh, go on, your last question, please.
It's probably a really
Away from the microphone, please.
You do if you want the online people to hear you.
Thanks. This is a really nasty question. So,
Well, I'm sorry, the time seems to have gone.
you talk quite rightly about being proud of the widening participation agenda. At the moment, our students are facing problems actually getting here at all in terms of the financial situation, and that's not just students from certain classes or certain countries, it's pretty much all students. How do you think we square that circle?
How long do you have?
About 30 seconds.
It's a very good point, Katrina, a really good point. I think the university is doing a lot of things to try and help. I think it is really difficult. I think we have to be as sympathetic as we possibly can be. We have to be aware that, and I didn't actually talk about this, but the student life is very different now from what it was 28 years ago. You know, almost every student that I know is doing a part-time job. And that makes life very different from what it was a long time ago. when we first started. So I don't have a magic ball, a magic money tree or anything like that, I'm afraid. We need to make it as easy as possible for them. And in some ways, you know, the idea that they can be able to see the lectures online. You know, I prefer teaching face-to-face in front of people, but I just accept that there are times when people are going to be, if they're off doing their part-time job, when the lecture is actually happening. I'm not going to suggest that we do evening teaching sessions for the students who are... But John was saying that you'd recorded some lectures in the evening. Come back to record lectures in the evening because that was because the room wasn't available for doing recording. But there are things that we can do, but it's a really difficult problem. Yeah. So that's a non-answer, I'm afraid. But I only had 30 seconds.
Great, thanks. We're just about time, so I think we'll wrap up the formal part of the proceedings today. And again, thank Steve for a really interesting tour of his career and a fascinating talk. Thank you very much.